Roger Green, host of the Surfing NASH Tsunami podcast. Today we are offering 3 conversations from episode 45, our interview with Tel Aviv Medical Center head of Gastroenterology and Hepatology Oren Shibolet. Plus, from the vault, our conversation earlier this year with Ukraine Director of Health Alliance's Tatiana Deshko and Fatty Liver Alliance President Mike Patel. This conversation starts with Professor Shibolet talking about his career history and shifts to discuss his experiences on October 7th, the day that Hamas terrorists murdered 1,400 Israelis, over 1,000 of whom were civilians, including many young and the elderly, even including babies. It's sobering to hear and to understand the impact it had on life during the day and in the aftermath. We all spend most of our lives in steatotic liver disease, an intellectually stimulating, pristine environment, but sometimes the outside world intrudes suddenly, glaringly, in a big way. This interview describes how that process has affected a major Israeli hospital and more broadly the people of Israel. It struck a chord with me, might do so with you, so just sit back, listen, learn, feel it, and when you're done, join the dialogue in our LinkedIn discussion group. When the events of October 7 happened, I reached out to our friend and past guest, Shirazel Rasagi, to ask if there was a appropriate health professional who we could bring on and talk a little bit about what that day and the subsequent events meant in Israel and for health professionals. She was good enough to put me in touch with Professor Oren Shibolet, who is the head of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at Tel Aviv Medical Center, and Professor Shibolet was good enough to do this interview today. Professor Shalom, how are you this morning? This afternoon, I guess, in Israel.
Oren Shibolet.
Yeah, we just had an air raid siren about 20 minutes ago, so we're still recovering a little bit.
How often does that happen this week?
It depends where you live in Israel. So in Tel Aviv, it happens about 5 times a day that we get air raid sirens and we have to run to protected areas within the institute. If you get caught outside, like I was caught about 4 days ago, you just have to lie next to a concrete wall or next to some shelter, cover your head and wait for about 10 minutes. And usually you hear the interceptors of the Iron Dome above you. It's a pretty scary experience. What can I say?
You just said, actually. So thank you for that. And let me note to people who are listening to this interview that there's a possibility, obviously, that we will be interrupted because of Professor Shibolet hears an air raid siren. That will be the end of this interview, at least for now, until we get a chance to schedule the rest of it. So under these circumstances and the stresses of the medical system this week in Israel, thank you so much for making time to talk with me today. Just to start, please tell us a little bit about your work, how you came to be interested in gastroenterology, hepatology, what you came to medicine to do, and how you came to the position that you hold today.
I'm 6 years old, and I have 2 sons. After I finished my army service, I went to med school in Jerusalem, in the Hebrew University, and graduating med school, I went to do internal medicine also in Jerusalem. And my head of department was the famous Danny Rachmilevitz, which is an IBD doctor, and he got me into gastro and hepatology. And when I finished my internal medicine, I went to do a gastroenterology. Then I met Professor Danny Shuval, which is also a very famous hepatologist, and he got me interested in hepatology. And the rest is history. I finished that. I went in 2004, I went to Boston to MGH, where I did my postdoc in molecular biology and toll-like receptor signaling. And coming back to Israel, I went back to Hadassah, but in 2011, I was recruited to Tel Aviv Medical Center as the head of the liver unit. And in 2016, I became the head of the whole gastro complex, which is a pretty large department. We have over 120 people with about 35 doctors, 30 nurses, a lot of research staff. And I had this very well organized and sophisticated and very dedicated team. I have my own lab here in liver disease. I do a lot of drug-induced liver injury, fatty liver, together with Shira for the last approximately 15 years, and a lot of cholestatic liver diseases, PSC and PBC. I'm part of the International PSC Study Group. I'm on the editorial board of the EASL Studios, and I've been involved in EASL for a long, long time. So that's that. I'm still an active physician. I have my clinics 3 or 4 times a week. I do procedures. A doctor.
Okay, a doctor and a guy who runs a significant department. All good. So a nuance that people who don't know about Israel might not understand. So if you have 2 sons, are they called up to military right now?
So both of them are in the Navy. My oldest son is actually now on reserve service in the Navy. The younger one, during his medical service, encountered a medical problem. He's not in the reserves anymore. So luckily for me, my younger boy is currently at home. He's studying in the Hebrew University to become a computer engineer, but there are no studies now. And the older one is actually in the northern part of Israel on active reserve duty.
And then just one other point while we were setting up this interview is you commented that you had originally been scheduled to be in the southern part of Israel today and that appointment was canceled or changed. But when you go to the southern part right now, is that part of your work as a physician or supporting the health of the people who've been affected there, or what is that?
No, there is, like anywhere in the world, there is a shortage of hepatology doctors, liver doctors, and there is a hospital in the southern part of Israel. It's called Barzilai. It's actually in Ashkelon, about 15 kilometers from the border, actually a little less from the border with the Gaza Strip, and they don't have a liver doctor. So because we have a large liver unit, we actually offered them services, and we've been going there for the last 4 or 5 years. So every Thursday, one of the guys, including me, go down there, and we see liver patients in their clinic, and we just support them. And of course, this has been postponed the last 2 weeks because they are under heavy shelling, and they have all ambulatory services put on hold, and they're only treating emergency cases. They received approximately 800 wounded, and they're more or less overwhelmed with injuries and stuff like that. So gastro and hepatology take a second seat. We don't go there.
One more question before we start on the narrative, which is today in Tel Aviv, are you seeing patients who were affected by the invasion, or is that treatment mostly localized to the south?
My hospital, Tel Aviv Medical Center, got about 250 wounded. We had more than 3,000 wounded. The two hospitals that took the biggest burden were Soroka, which is the biggest hospital in the southern part of Israel, in Beersheba. They treated over 1,000 patients. And Barzilai, which I mentioned, which took another 1,000. And the rest were divided among other hospitals in Israel. They were flown here by helicopters. We have, of course, a helipad on the roof. And we got about 200 and something patients, out of which about 50 are still hospitalized. We have approximately 12 critically injured soldiers and civilians that are still hospitalized here in very difficult shape. Luckily for us, we weren't needed here in Tel Aviv, but actually because of the lack of physicians in Barzilai, my guys went down there to do 2 ERCPs on 2 critically injured patients that had massive injuries in the bile ducts and in the pancreas. So a nurse and the head of endoscopy unit went there, treated these 2 guys and came back. But overall here, we personally did not take care of any wounded civilians or soldiers, which most of the injuries are orthopedics or surgical, and we weren't needed. So actually, the hospital is being set up for escalation. We are moving many of our departments to an underground hospital, an emergency hospital that we have here. So our work now is mostly helping the hospital with giving residents and fellows to the internal medicine wards and to the surgical wards, so they take care of patients that are not going to go down to the emergency hospital. But gastro-wise, we have about 50% reduction in our activity. And we're doing much less endoscopies, colonoscopies, and clinics now than we did before. Although, because of the corona, the pandemic, we are very used to doing telemedicine, so we're doing that. And also because of the way my unit is built, it's actually well protected. So we are still doing colonoscopies, endoscopies, ERCPs, etc.
So tell me a little bit about your day on October 7th.
So it was a Saturday, so we were all at home. And actually, the air raid siren woke us up around 6:30, which was it was a big surprise. And waking up, I wasn't exactly sure what was going on. My partner didn't wake up. I told her, wake up, let's go to the protected area, and she said, no, it must be a mistake. But of course, I turned the television on, and we started getting reports that something very massive was going on in the southern part of Israel. And then towards 9-ish, 8:30 or so, it turned out to be, the reports were already pouring from the field that there were horrendous casualties. And of course, we called the hospital. We were put on hold. We have emergency posts. Each one in Israel has an emergency post in the hospital. We were on the emergency post calls, but I wasn't needed in the hospital, so I didn't actually go. All the surgical staff, orthopedic staff, and of course, intensive care unit, the ER, everything came in, but we didn't. And so the first time I went to the hospital was on Sunday, which is a working day for us. But all day long, we were glued to the television with horrendous reports and, the casualty numbers. It was horrible to see because it was starting 100, 200, 300, 400. And the nightmare in the big party in the southern part of Israel was unraveling. And they were saying that there are hundreds of young kids casualties. It was really a shocking day for all of us. Sunday, we went to the hospital. And then because I'm senior management, department. I was involved in multiple meetings about setting of the hospital, what needs to be done, all the protected areas, mapping them out, mapping the people that need to be called to reserve service. So we currently have 5 people that were called off to reserve service, and they're not here. And the education system, the schooling, everything stopped. So actually we have problems with mothers that have kids and fathers that are on reserve call. So this interrupted our workflow a little bit, but the unbelievable thing is everybody's volunteering, everybody's pitching in, and we actually do not have currently a shortage of gastro doctors, and we're doing okay.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've benefited from this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the contents of the conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. We'll be back next week discussing the liver risk score and some news about our ASLD coverage next month. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.